No easy answers. I see that all the time on the news today and on the internet and various places. They even say, it's just a comment saying, hey, life is difficult, get used to it, right? And Jesus, or Yeshua, he says, the way to life is difficult, and it's a narrow path, and it's hard to find. So that's reality. There are no easy answers. It's difficult, it's hard. It's a challenge, right? It's an adventure. I saw on YouTube today somebody's choice to abort a child that the doctors said there was something medically wrong with him. And you read all the comments about how difficult it must be. And, my mom lost a baby before me. And I almost died when I was 2 or 3. I drank bleach, had to be rushed to the hospital. And then later, I managed to get an infection and got that little red line up my arm. Mom stayed up all night and soaked my arm. And, such is life. We have some difficult, life-threatening things. Like, a little while later I got hit by a car head-on. Thankfully, or thank God, it wasn't at a very high speed. And, the older Volkswagens, they've got this nice curved hood so that you can kind of like slide up it and then slide off the windshield, which I proved by experience. And you just only catch the glimpse of the driver's surprise as you slide by and go off the other side of the car. But people have difficult choices to make, and people make them, or life makes the decision for them. The airman that got shot down and has got a wounded buddy, throws him in the life raft, takes care of him for a while as long as he's alive, or the soldier, or the fireman, the rescue workers, whomever it is. It's just like the parents who have the children with some kind of disability. It's all very difficult. There's very few people that I know of who've had just like a cakewalk through life. But we can make good choices. If you have good information. The Bible said, people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge, the lack of knowing better. And human history is filled with that. I mean, Plato had in his book, The Republic, even a parable about it, about how people are like these slaves in a cave, and they're all bound to the wall, and they've got a light behind them, and there's these shadows in front of them, and they're just spend their time, guessing at shadows. And he says people really need to get unchained from the wall and walk up out of the caves into the true light of life. And everybody has some light of life. Everybody has some level of truth. It's not whether you're a follower of Yeshua, Jesus, or you're a Jew, or a Muslim, or a secular person who doesn't have a specific religion. But you can understand we're spiritual beings. I mean, it's just like all the automobiles that we have today. They have different types of engines, and they still run on different types of fuel. Although most of it is fossil fuel, but you can run them on air, you can run them on electricity. But they're all still cars, vehicles, they all get around. It's not a horse or a dog, depending, a reindeer, depending on what part of the world you're in. So they all have some of the same moving parts. You have wheels, you have sleds, you have treads, you have hoofs, paws, and it's all the same stuff. There's a common reality for everything. I mean, if there wasn't a common reality, how could we interact, right? like I was talking to a guy the other day, he said, well, every religion has their prophet. And Yeshua was the prophet from the Creator God. And he spoke in parables. The sower went out to sow. And then after that, he describes what the parable is. And the book is there for everybody who wants to read it and try and understand it. So we're all like these different vehicles. And you've got some that are running on gasoline, different grades. Some that are running on diesel fuel. They run vehicles on kerosene. They run vehicles on air, just compressed air. They run vehicles on electricity. It's still all the same concept. And they run, well, if you consider an airplane a vehicle, which it is because it'll roll around on the ground, but it has to fly in the air too. They run on jets because that's what's efficient and gets the high speed in ships. And trains, you know, trains run on tracks. They got wheels. A huge diesel electric engines because it's just better to burn a diesel engine to produce electricity and then control the motor, the electric motor. It's just like we have ships. They're diesel electric or nuclear electric. You think about it, a lot of those warships out there, they're driving their propellers with electricity because it's just more efficient. But they're all subject to the laws of nature. And deer and horses and human beings all have legs too. And birds have legs and wings, right? And some of them fly and some of them swim, and we all get around in some mode of transportation. Some with 2 legs, some with 4 legs. There's insects with multiple legs. But it's still all just transporting a living being around, right? But how you get around affects your life. So the fuel that you choose to use affects your engine. Now, if you take aviation fuel and you put it in a gasoline car, it may burn for a while and then it'll blow up or burn, because aviation fuel burns at a higher temperature. And if you put diesel fuel into the gasoline car, it may run a little while and then it'll just plug up because diesel fluid is not as refined as gasoline. Actually, it used to be just byproducts of getting gasoline. And you don't even try to use gasoline in an electric car. There's just no place for it. And animals know this. It's actually not a tough choice, is it? It's self-evident. It's a self-evident truth. Now, when you're pouring fluid into a car, if you don't know any better, you can do something bad. But they actually got the spigots, nozzles and that, so that you don't make those bad choices. Because people used to make bad choices. And you'd fill their tank up with diesel fluid, and then, you know, after a little while, they'd be like, it just stopped working. But animals don't do that. They know the foods to eat, keep them running. It's human beings that need instruction, right? I mean, you don't usually go see animals eating things that'll kill them, or will keep them unfit, or will somehow inhibit them. But the human beings have tough choices to make, because we can choose pleasure over good health. We can get addicted to certain types of pleasures for our palates, for our taste buds, and simply, you know, who cares if I live 5, 10, 15 years shorter? Until that time comes up and then you're screaming in pain and agony and, you know, looking for some medicine or a doctor to cut something out. Yeah, when you put it in those kind of things, yeah, it was a difficult choice, right? Pleasure over a longer life, pleasure now over pain later, But we don't always see that. They're difficult sometimes because we just don't see them. So we have these difficult choices to make. I was down at the lakefront yesterday and they had a breast cancer awareness thing. And I was asking the people and the nurses and the medical professionals, well, you know, there are difficult choices in this and this. But I have a little bit of background, so I was asking them, well, what about all the stuff that talks about proper diet? And, oh, yeah, that alleviates, up to 50%, even can eliminate some of it. But the difficult choice is that modern medicine is based on slicing and dicing and giving you drugs. The medical industry, powers that be, get their health and wealth and their power and their position because they give people drugs and because they sell drugs and because they slice and dice. And like one person says, well, you know, it's hard to change people's habits, you know, change their lifestyles. In fact, the Fast Company magazine says that. They did a study. The hardest thing to do is change somebody's lifestyle. Which again is the difficult choice. What is your lifestyle? Pay me now or pay me later. The laws of nature always work. You know, if you don't know any better and you're putting the wrong fluid in the vehicle, it comes to mind about the subject of sugar, because I was reading in the Scientist magazine online that, well, I knew we had sugars in our body and we use sugars in that, but they were talking about how disease and viruses attach to the sugar on the cell. In fact, cancer cells are really, really, really good at sucking up a lot of sugar. And they've got all these new therapies to, you know, let's see if we can keep them from attaching to the sugars. But from a biblical point of view, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. The Bible says eat honey because it is good. So wisdom will be to your soul. Eat honey because it is good. And you look it up online and everything. You say, no, honey, yes, honey is a different chemical composition than cane sugar, vegetable sugars. In fact, your body has to work harder to get the nutrients out of the vegetable sugars than it does out of the honey. In fact, it takes apart the honey in the stomach, whereas it has to digest the cane sugars, the vegetable sugars, in the intestine. And it's harder work. So imagine if you had an assembly line and you're assembling these vehicles and you weren't putting on or taking off the parts when it's most convenient. You actually had to put more energy into it and more time if you could even get out of the system what you needed or put onto the vehicle. So imagine all these cars running out there if they were missing bolts and screws and stuff because they didn't put them on. You know, the line wasn't set up so they had the screws ready. They didn't have the bolts ready to bolt stuff together when it was convenient and easy. So they're spending time later to put the bolts and the nuts on to hold it all together. How much more expensive would that car be? And knowing human nature, would they get every bolt all the time? They could be missing bolts, right? And where you have missing bolts, you have openings, right? And where you have openings, the water can get in and the rust can start and your car will fall apart. So take a look at just how we use sugar and what type of sugar that we use. honey is absorbed slowly. Refined sugars, all of them, whether they're organic or not. Your body tends to use those much like it uses a drug. It works differently in your body too. And how many of our diseases, cancer, diabetes, how many more are based around the sugars that we're using? Because we're not building ourselves right. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Would you do that with your car? Would you do that with your house? Do you know how hard it is to decide later, oh yeah, I need to remodel my house, and you start ripping off walls and putting in sewer, plumbing, electrical, whatever it is. It would have been so much easier if you would have had some forethought and you would have built it into to begin with. What do you know? Okay, well, we all suffer from some type of ignorance, right? Nobody knows everything. But what if all of the carpenters, what if all the automakers decided, well, I can make more money if I do it this way. And the customer will just pay more. Human beings capable of doing that? Eat honey because it is good. Comes apart at a different place in your system, so it's used quicker. Well, it's not used quicker, it's used sooner, but it comes into your body slower, as opposed to you get the other stuff. When you actually get it out, it works really quick. You ever put the wrong oil in your car for the time of year? It don't work so well. Actually, what it does is it makes your engine wear out quicker. Or it can get so thick that your engine won't start. And that's just with sugar. That's just the difficult choice of, do I get raw, local, hopefully organic sugars, and I spend $5 for 24 ounces? Or do I spend a couple dollars, $3 for, some cane sugar that they have treated nicely and it's not too terribly processed? Or I can spend just a couple bucks and buy this great big huge pound of 5-10 pounds of white sugar and pour it in as ever I need it. Yeah, it's your choice. It seems difficult to some, but then you could get sick later and you end up paying more. So the $5 worth of raw honey that you got locally, in the long run, doesn't cost as much. Just like the car, if you build it correctly, doesn't cost as much. If you build a house correctly at the right time, it just doesn't. But if we had the knowledge, would the choice be that difficult? Yeah, the difficult choices. It might just start out with a simple choice. Which may lead to other choices that we make. Right? If the sugars that we're consuming are part of the interface between, or part of this problem with cancers, how many other things, because they surround the whole cell, are they also affecting? Yeah, in the scientist it says, yeah, well, the sugars around it determine how some of the proteins operate. So the mother who's eating the refined sugars as opposed to the honey, and the baby's developing, and maybe it's ignorance, could be part of the problem. It's part of the problem with cancers. Fast-growing tumors, they thrive on sugar too. If your body is burning up all this energy to get the refined sugars out, what's it burning up? Oxygen, right? Other energies, right? Well, then there's less oxygen for everything else, right? When you get into the engineering aspect of it, a simple choice based in not having enough knowledge can be leading to the harder choices. And it's easy to sit around and watch TV or play a game or watch a movie or ball game or just go out and enjoy life and have pleasures than to sit down and educate yourself. But if you've been through some rough stuff, then you're like, well, you know, I'm responsible for me. Oops. That's makes it more difficult, isn't it? But people know that, and some people do. Think about it. Your choice of sugars could be giving you harder choices to make later. Something to think about. Difficult choices. You know, you're not the airman who got shot down and over the water and you pull your wounded buddy up into the boat. You're not the soldier necessarily out in the battlefield who got ambushed and lying amongst, you know, 4 wounded buddies, or the firefighters who went into the house with their gear on and something collapses. When you think about it, just the fact that we have all these simple pleasures in the United States and all these labor-saving devices and all these distractions, it makes dealing with the reality of life a little bit more difficult, because it's easier to just avoid until you're faced with a really difficult choice. Yeah, the paper said a couple weeks ago about there's no easy answers to the problem of violence in Milwaukee. And you're right, they're very difficult. The leaders have to make some very difficult choices. Like, are they going to take care of we the people, or are they going to keep their power and position? Difficult choice. You know? Would you say the right thing and do the right thing for the overall good of society or the city if it would cost you your job? And you might have to go do some more difficult work to provide for yourself. Difficult choices. Very difficult choices. For some. For everybody, right? Enjoy.